Welcome to Vietnam True Crime. This is where we share real criminal cases that happened in Vietnam. Vietnam is known for its peace and safety, but like any society, it still has its darker side and stories worth reflecting on. Everything you hear here is based on the truth, nothing but the truth. For the sake of international viewers, the full names of both perpetrators and victims have been altered, but the essence of the story remains unchanged.
May 4th, 2010. A summer morning in Hanoi. The Tran family began a day that seemed as ordinary as any other. Their daughter, Emily Tran, was only 20 years old. A bright, obedient young woman, she was in the prime of her youth. That morning, Emily Tran left home early, telling her parents she was going to meet friends and might return late. No one in the family could have imagined that this would be the last time they saw their daughter alive. As night fell, Emily Tran did not return home. At first, the family thought she might be out with friends. But when the clock struck 10 p.m., then 11 p.m., worry began to build. Emily was a dutiful daughter. She had never stayed out overnight without informing her parents. The Tran family called their daughter's phone. It rang, but no one answered. They tried again and again, dozens of times, yet only silence responded. Mrs. B, increasingly anxious, phoned Emily's friends, but all of them replied that they had no idea where she was. That night, the entire family barely slept. They split up to search every street and corner around the places Emily usually visited. They stopped by cafes, her friends' homes, even hospitals, fearing she might have had an accident. But every effort was in vain. Emily Tran had vanished as if she had never existed. Reporting to the police. The next morning, when all hope of finding her themselves had run out, the family decided to report her missing to the police. A missing persons report was filed, along with a detailed description of Emily's appearance and the clothes she had last been seen wearing. In 2010, a young person going missing was sometimes dismissed as maybe they just ran off somewhere. But in Emily Tran's case, the police quickly noticed unusual signs. Her phone had been switched off, she had no luggage or money with her to go far, and most importantly, she was a reserved girl who had never once run away from home. The investigation began immediately. Officers reviewed surveillance cameras in the areas Emily frequented and collected information from her friends and acquaintances. Clues slowly surfaced. The last time anyone saw Emily was when she entered an apartment building in Hanoi. May 6, 2010. A security guard checking the rooftop of a building in Cao Ge district noticed a strange odor. Approaching a water tank, he was horrified to discover a large object wrapped tightly in plastic and cloth. A chilling scene emerged, a dismembered body. Police quickly sealed off the area. After forensic examination, they confirmed it was Emily Tran, the young woman reported missing 2 days earlier. The body showed multiple injuries, proving this was no accident, but a deliberate murder, followed by an elaborate attempt to conceal the corpse. The news spread instantly. Vietnamese newspapers all reported the case. The citizens of the capital and soon the entire country were shocked. No one could believe that a 20-year-old girl had been brutally murdered, her body hidden on the rooftop of a residential building. Every major news outlet went into special coverage, from established print papers like Tui Che, Tan Yen, and Nguyen Hai Duong to the new online platforms emerging at the time, such as Vietnam Net and VN Express. The case dominated front pages. The media landscape was very different then, before social media was widespread. Official press reports were almost the only source of information for the public. And so, when stark headlines appeared, female student body found on rooftop of apartment building, the nation was instantly gripped by shock.
Readers in 2010, used to ordinary crimes like theft, fights, or domestic disputes, that sometimes ended in violence, had never imagined a murder so gruesome and calculated could take place in the heart of the capital. Journalists repeatedly used the phrase, sending shockwaves through public opinion. This was not just a cliché, it reflected a genuine social reality, horror spreading almost instantly through the collective consciousness. On online forums, popular gathering places for young people then, such as Voz, WebTrefo, or student message boards, threads about the case exploded. Many expressed fear of moving alone around the city, especially young women. Students in Hanoi confessed they no longer dared to return from school late or even ride the dormitory elevator alone. The case shattered the assumed sense of safety in urban life. What disturbed the public most was the inhuman nature of the crime. A victim not only murdered, but her body carried up and hidden on the rooftop of a high-rise building. Journalists, in commentaries of the time, voiced an even greater concern. Was Vietnamese society now witnessing a shift in crime, from spontaneous, impulsive acts to cold, calculated violence, devoid of human feeling? This was something people were unprepared for, and it sowed seeds of lingering insecurity. Some newspapers described the heartbreaking scene of the family receiving Emily's remains. Even written in restrained language, the words sent chills through readers. The story of an ordinary family suddenly losing their daughter, tied to such a savage crime in the heart of Hanoi, made many ask, if this could happen to them, then who in society was truly safe? In public spaces, cafes, buses, markets, people whispered about the case. Mothers warned their daughters to always go out in groups. Men who rarely paid attention to social news now found themselves glued to TV bulletins. The case had become a collective nightmare for urban Vietnam at the dawn of a new decade. Legal experts also weighed in. Some said the case demanded a new approach for police, not just solving crimes, but confronting a new type of criminal, one who was methodical, calculating, and chillingly detached. Social psychologists interviewed in the press spoke of a collective shock the case had inflicted, warning that such fear could leave long-lasting marks on public consciousness. What made the public shiver most was the familiarity of the setting, a building they walked past every day, a space anyone could enter, and a victim who was a student, the same age as millions of young people nationwide. Hanoi in those days felt heavy. The streets were still bustling, but behind people's eyes there was a quiet unease. Whispered conversations in offices, hushed talks in cafes, questions raised around family dinner tables. This case did not remain just the story of one apartment rooftop. It became a story for the whole society.
A country once accustomed to impulsive killings, fueled by quarrels, jealousy, or sudden rage, now faced a crime executed with chilling calculation and cruelty. Psychologists interviewed in the press used terms rarely seen before in the public vocabulary. Inhuman crime, signs of psychological disorder, deviant personality, an act resembling murders portrayed in Western films. The investigators faced unprecedented pressure. Pressure from the victim's family, demanding justice. Pressure from public opinion, demanding quick, clear answers. Pressure from the government to preserve social order and national image. This was a turning point for the entire society, confronting the grim reality that monstrous crime could occur in the heart of the capital. Vietnamese police now stood before one of the most shocking cases of the decade. Who was the killer? Why commit such brutality? And where would the investigation lead? Born into an ordinary family in Quang Ninh, Michael Tran was once known as an intelligent young man, ambitious, and expected to have a bright future. He was a student at a university in Hanoi. However, beneath that intellectual facade was a man with a complex personality. Friends once remarked that Michael Tran was smart but introverted, rarely shared his thoughts, and was especially jealous and controlling in romantic relationships. The seeds of selfishness and possessiveness, which seemed to exist only at the level of personal emotions, gradually became a dangerous undercurrent. Criminal psychologists point out, in many cases, perpetrators do not necessarily come from a criminal background. Some were once good students or intellectual workers. But selfishness, combined with extreme possessiveness, when met with conflict, can transform them into murderers. Michael Tran is a prime example of that paradox. In his 20s, Michael Tran had all the conditions to build a stable life, education, ability, and the love of his family. But instead of maturing with reason, he allowed himself to be dominated by jealousy, personal pride, and the fear of losing control over those who once had emotional ties with him. The fateful meeting. In May 2010, Hanoi entered the sweltering summer. According to later testimony, Michael Tran confessed that he and the victim had once been in a relationship. Taking advantage of Ivy, his new girlfriend, giving him a key to look after her apartment, on the afternoon of May 4, 2010, Michael Tran invited Emily Tran over. After intimacy, when he saw her answer a phone call from her new boyfriend, jealousy consumed him, and he killed her. According to his statement, at around 10:30 p.m. that night, while Emily Tran was looking in the mirror, he used a sharp knife to stab her from behind, killing her instantly. After committing the crime, he dragged the body into the bathroom, caught up her clothes, severed her head and 10 fingers, then wrapped the body in a blanket and carried it to the rooftop of the apartment building. Taking her motorbike and laptop, Michael Tran brought them to a pawn shop. At noon on May 5, 2010, he caught a bus back to Quang Ninh, carrying part of the victim's body and her clothes in plastic bags, which he dumped into the Cam River. With bloodstains splattered on the walls of Yen's apartment, the perpetrator bought paint to cover them up to avoid detection. More than 10 days later, when he realized the crime had been discovered, Michael Tran fled. Since their daughter's death, the Tran family has not had a single peaceful day. Whenever they received a phone call, they rushed out with relatives to search for their unlucky daughter's remains. After nearly a month of searching through Hanoi, Quang Ninh, and Haiphong, on the morning of June 7, part of the victim's body was found near a field in Quang Ninh. Criminal psychology indicates that individuals with extreme possessiveness often struggle to accept their ex-partner finding happiness with someone else. They see it as a humiliation, as a personal failure. For Michael Tran, wounded pride mixed with feelings of loss pushed him into a state of emotional explosion. In that moment, the boundary between reason and instinct vanished. No longer a former student knowledgeable in law, no longer a young man once expected to have a promising future. All that remained in the cramped apartment was a man trembling with jealousy, obsessed with the thought, if she cannot belong to me, then she cannot belong to anyone else. In that moment, a young life was taken. A 20-year-old woman, full of dreams and future, was forever stopped by the hand of someone who had once been close to her. According to criminal psychologists, at the time of the crime, perpetrators often fall into a state of explosive loss of control. This happens when long-accumulated inner conflicts meet the final catalyst, in this case, Emily Tran's resolute rejection, turning all repression into extreme action. Not stopping at murder, Michael Tran also decided to dismember and dispose of the body to conceal the crime. Coldly, he carried Emily Tran's body out to the balcony and began dismembering it for disposal. Pieces of fabric, plastic bags, and cardboard boxes became tools of concealment. At the moment the knife pierced down, Michael Tran had crossed an irreversible boundary. He not only took away a young woman's life, but also buried his own future, freedom, and humanity. From a former student who could have become an ordinary citizen with a stable career, Michael Tran turned himself into a notorious criminal. And from that night on, the name Michael Tran entered the history of the most shocking criminal cases of the early 21st century in Vietnam. After killing Emily Tran, Michael Tran moved on to another stage of crime, concealment. In his mind, fear and survival instincts quickly overshadowed any sense of remorse. Michael Tran knew clearly, if he left the scene as it was, all evidence would expose him immediately. He chopped Emily Tran's body into pieces, wrapped them in plastic bags and cardboard boxes. This was no longer an impulsive act, but a series of calculated behaviors, showing chilling rationality after the crime.
In the memory of many people, the 2010 case of Michael Tran was not only a personal tragedy, but also a special chronicle of perseverance, determination, and the sharp investigative abilities of the Vietnamese police force. When Emily Tran's body was discovered on the rooftop of the apartment building, a journey to hunt down the killer was immediately launched. From here, each piece was assembled, revealing one of the most shocking criminal investigations. Immediately after the body was discovered, the Hanoi police quickly sealed off the entire rooftop area of the apartment building. Photos taken at the scene and preserved in the case file showed a horrifying sight. The victim's body had been dismembered into many parts. Forensic technicians immediately carried out examinations. They discovered fingerprints, fibers left behind, and several other important pieces of evidence. Notably, a surveillance camera in the building captured the image of a young man entering the elevator in a hurry, carrying bulky bags. The image was blurry, but enough to give investigators an initial lead. Another remarkable clue was a pair of blood-stained sneakers found near the scene. Forensic tests confirmed the blood matched the victim's DNA. This confirmed that the killer had direct contact and may have lost control during the crime. In addition, witness statements also played an important role. Several residents of the building testified that they saw a young man accompanied by a woman on the day the victim went missing. Afterward, they only saw the man leaving alone, looking rushed, his eyes darting as if afraid of being followed.
After compiling the initial data, the Hanoi police narrowed down the suspects. One name immediately stood out: Michael Tran, the victim's ex-boyfriend who had had many conflicts with her. When contacting Emily Tran's family and friends, many confirmed that Emily Tran had told them Michael Tran was quite jealous and strongly possessive, even though the two had already broken up. More suspicious was the fact that Michael Tran disappeared right after Emily Tran went missing. His phone was switched off, and no one knew where he was. In the eyes of the investigators, this was a clear sign. He was highly likely directly related to the case. Investigators began tracing Michael Tran's movements before the murder. Through surveillance footage from the building, they discovered his image walking with Emily Tran. This detail further strengthened the hypothesis. Michael Tran was the last person with the victim before she disappeared. This was an extremely serious case, shocking public opinion, so not only the Hanoi police, but also the Ministry of Public Security closely supervised it. Special task forces were established, coordinating closely between criminal police, forensic experts, and the Fugitive Tracking Department. A series of professional measures were deployed, reviewing relationships, tracking bank transactions, checking his travel itinerary. Even detectives contacted bus stations, train stations, and taxi companies to find clues about Michael Tran's escape. Every small detail was carefully considered, because just one mistake and the killer could flee far away. An unexpected piece of information appeared. Through checking his old contacts, police discovered that Michael Tran might be hiding in his hometown in Quang Ninh. Michael Tran's family had lived there, and he had many acquaintances. The possibility that the suspect sought familiar ground to hide was assessed as very high. Immediately, a team of detectives was dispatched to Quang Ninh. Surveillance measures were carried out in secret, monitoring the houses of Michael Tran's relatives, checking hotels and guest houses, and even internet cafes, places where many fugitives often try to contact others or follow the news. Meanwhile, in Hanoi, forensic officers continued analyzing evidence collected at the scene. The test results increasingly confirmed the hypothesis that Michael Tran was the killer. DNA, fingerprints, and even a strand of hair found on bloodied clothing all matched his biological samples. Those days, not only were the police working under immense strain, but society also anxiously followed every development. Newspapers continuously updated the latest news, while social networks began spreading rumors that the suspect had escaped abroad. Many people expressed concern. If the killer was still free, who could guarantee society's safety? Inside the investigative agency, the pressure was no less. This was not only a criminal case, but also a race against public opinion. Any delay could shake the trust of the people. Therefore, every step had to be quick but absolutely precise. From surveillance cameras, the building guard's testimony, to unexplained fingerprints, investigators quickly narrowed down the suspect. The name Michael Tran gradually emerged as an important piece of the whole puzzle. However, Michael Tran was no longer in Hanoi. In the following days, through monitoring and collecting witness statements, police discovered he had traveled to Quang Ninh, his hometown. Detectives immediately set out, coordinating with local police to expand the search. The investigative team assessed Michael Tran was panicked but still trying to conceal his crime. He might seek familiar places, old friends, relatives, or even temporary hideouts. Therefore, detectives expanded surveillance of all of Michael Tran's connections in Quang Ninh. The investigation required close coordination among many units, from Hanoi Police, where the case began, to Quang Ninh Police, where the suspect was most likely hiding, and even the professional departments of the Ministry of Public Security. On one hand, investigators in Hanoi continued exploiting the scene, consolidating evidence. On the other, forces in Quang Ninh urgently tracked Michael Tran's whereabouts. Every small piece of information was reported back to the task force for analysis, connecting into the overall picture. Tense hours of work followed one after another. In closed meeting rooms, Michael Tran's movements were drawn on whiteboards with specific timelines and locations. Experienced officers could not hide their concern. A young intellectual, a student, how could he fall into such a brutal crime?
Every question, every hypothesis was raised and dissected until finally a plan to surround and arrest him was put into motion. Hanoi, early May 2010. After nearly a week of tension, clues gathered from the crime scene and witness testimony gradually narrowed down the prime suspect, Michael Tran. His name was quickly placed on investigators' desks, accompanied by his personal profile, once a student with a calm appearance but tied to a complicated romantic relationship with the victim. Detectives of the Criminal Police Department, in coordination with Hanoi Police, immediately launched the arrest plan. Intelligence indicated that Michael Tran no longer appeared in Hanoi. Phone traces and personal relationships pointed him to hiding in Quang Ninh, his hometown. A manhunt was urgently launched. At noon on May 18, 2010, in a quiet residential area in Halong, a police vehicle stopped. Plainclothes detectives stepped out, quickly surrounding the house where Michael Tran was hiding. Inside, Michael Tran thought he had temporarily escaped the law. He stayed at an acquaintance's house, kept a low profile, limited contact with the outside world. But all calculations quickly collapsed. When the door burst open, the stares of police officers swept across the room. Michael Tran was shocked to realize he had no way out. According to an investigator's account, that moment was very brief. Michael Tran did not resist, did not cry out. His face turned pale, his eyes vacant, then gradually lowered in heavy silence. A pair of cold handcuffs quickly locked the hands that once held the knife to commit the horrifying crime. When escorted to Quang Ninh Police Headquarters for initial procedures, Michael Tran appeared drained. He sat hunched, spoke little, sometimes only answering basic questions in a hoarse voice. When directly asked by investigators, "Why did you kill Emily Tran?" Michael Tran was silent for a few seconds, then softly said, "Because of conflict. At that moment, I couldn't control myself."
The arrest of Michael Tran not only marked the success of the task force, but also brought a sigh of relief to public opinion. The media immediately published breaking news. The apartment building murderer has fallen into the net of the law. After many days of living in fear and anxiety, the people finally had an answer to the rumors and their obsession with a killer roaming free in society. At the investigation agency, initially, Michael Tran was evasive, deliberately avoiding direct questions. But before overwhelming evidence, fingerprints at the scene, security camera footage, and cross-examined witness statements, he was forced to bow his head. Michael Tran confessed. On May 4, 2010, he arranged to meet his ex-girlfriend, Emily Tran, at the apartment of his new girlfriend in Khao Zai. His initial purpose was only to talk, to resolve issues in their old relationship. But as words escalated, conflicts broke out. Emily Tran scolded him, demanded her laptop and some belongings back. Michael Tran felt insulted. His anger and selfishness caused him to lose control. He admitted to using a knife in the apartment to attack the victim. When he saw Emily Tran collapse, instead of stopping, Michael Tran continued his barbaric actions. Afraid of being exposed, he conceived the idea of disposing of the body. Expert analysis. According to analysis published by Dan Tree and VN Express, Michael Tran was not a born criminal. He was once a smart student with a future, but selfishness, extreme possessiveness, and lack of emotional control turned him into a brutal killer. Criminal psychology experts said, in an instant, accumulated personal conflicts combined with the fear of losing face, of having his romantic secrets exposed, made Michael Tran choose violence. He was no longer rational. The arrest and detailed confession helped police close the investigation process, but at the same time, it raised painful questions for society. Why did an educated man with family expectations slip so far as to commit an unforgivable crime? Was this tragedy a warning about distorted relationships, about the lack of emotional management skills among part of the youth? The investigation closed. Michael Tran, once a student, once a young intellectual, had become a cold-blooded murderer. His crime not only took a life, left pain for a family, but also sowed fear in society. He thought he could conceal the truth with cunning tricks, but before justice, every calculation became meaningless. On July 14, 2010, the People's Court of Hanoi opened the first instance trial of Michael Tran, the defendant in the case of murdering his ex-girlfriend at the Causier apartment complex. More than 2 months after the incident was exposed, the courtroom was packed. Not only relatives of both families, but also students, reporters, and ordinary citizens came to watch. Everyone wanted to witness the moment justice spoke before a crime considered barbaric in modern judicial history. The indictment was read out clearly by the representative of the procuracy. Michael Tran was prosecuted on 2 charges: murder under Article 93 of the 1999 Penal Code and robbery. His actions were described in detail, using a knife to stab the victim multiple times until she died, then dismembering the body to cover up the crime. The stolen property included a mobile phone and a laptop. The courtroom fell silent as the cold words of the indictment echoed. The victim's family, especially her mother, burst into sobs, her choking cries blending with the hum of the ceiling fans, creating a suffocating tension. Michael Tran's testimony at trial was recorded by many mainstream Vietnamese newspapers. He admitted the crime, but claimed that he did not intend to kill beforehand. He said the conflict broke out during an argument, and he lost control, leading to his brutal actions. Throughout the trial, people could not forget the image of the victim's mother sitting in the front row. She constantly wiped her tears, sometimes bursting into uncontrollable sobs when her daughter was mentioned. The pain of losing a young, beautiful daughter with a promising future was irreparable. A reporter from Phuoc Vietnam, Vietnam Law, captured her words during a break. "I can't believe my child died at the hands of someone she once called her boyfriend. She used to tell me about Michael Tran, used to trust him, and yet..." The defense for Michael Tran presented its arguments. The defendant did not have the initial intention to kill, but committed the crime in a state of strong emotional agitation.
Michael Tran turned himself in and cooperated honestly, which should be considered a mitigating circumstance. His family pledged to compensate the victim's family. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained a firm stance. Michael Tran's actions were particularly dangerous to society, provoking public outrage. The dismemberment of the body demonstrated cruelty and calculation to evade the law. This was a typical case requiring the harshest penalty for deterrence. The debate in the courtroom lasted for many hours. Phap Luat Ho Chi Minh City analyzed. Michael Tran's actions fully constituted the crime of murder under Clause 1, Article 1 of the Penal Code, with aggravating circumstances. Murder with hooligan characteristics. Acts carried out in a barbaric manner. Despicable motive, stealing property, revenge over love. At the same time, the charge of robbery applied when Michael Tran took the victim's personal belongings. Although there were mitigating circumstances, such as cooperation and remorse, the overall actions and consequences were far too serious. Therefore, the procuracy recommended the death penalty for Michael Tran. On November 11, 2010, at the appellate trial of the Supreme People's Court in Hanoi, Michael Tran once again faced justice. Compared with the first instance trial, his eyes seemed more tired, with no trace of defiance. His lawyer continued to plead, citing that the defendant had cooperated, repented, and had a clean background before committing the crime, asking for leniency.
However, this argument was quickly dismissed. The representative of the Supreme People's Procuracy affirmed Michael Tran's actions were exceptionally serious, hooligan-like, and deprived a person of life in a brutal manner, while attempting to dispose of the body to conceal the crime. No mitigating circumstance can outweigh the necessity of the death penalty. The victim's family wept. They said, "We no longer have our daughter. This pain can never be compensated. Justice must be done." Just minutes later, the trial panel declared the death penalty upheld for Michael Tran. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone seemed to understand this was the final chapter of a legal journey that had shaken public opinion for months. Public opinion, fear, and lessons. The Michael Tran case did not stop at a verdict. It became a heated topic among students, parents, and even legal and psychological scholars. In Tuệ Tre newspaper, 2010, many readers sent letters expressing horror. No one could imagine that someone once a student, educated, could act so brutally. Another parent shared, "We worry for our children, not just about their studies, but also their relationships, their lifestyle, their ability to control emotions." At universities, many seminars were held. Law lecturers emphasized, a person knowledgeable about the law still committed a crime, even a serious one. This shows that knowledge is not enough to stop evil when moral values are distorted and possessiveness overshadows reason. On online forums, young people express their fear about the way Michael Tran disposed of the body, cutting it into parts, hiding it in different places. They called it a cold-blooded act, hard to believe from someone who once lived alongside them in a university environment. Psychologists analyzed that Michael Tran's case was the result of selfishness and possessiveness in love. He could not accept his ex-girlfriend having a new partner. Poor emotional control, jealousy escalating into violence. Distorted thinking after committing the crime. One expert concluded, in Michael Tran, knowledge and morality were separated. When reason cannot guide emotion, knowledge becomes a dangerous tool. With the death penalty, Michael Tran paid the highest price for his crime. Yet the public remained haunted by the question, why did a young intellectual with a bright future become such a brutal killer? The verdict closed a shocking case, but opened many lessons. About character education for young people, about emotional management skills in relationships, and about society's vigilance toward abnormal signs in personal relationships. On November 11, 2010, the appellate trial of the Supreme People's Court in Hanoi re-examined Michael Tran's case. Previously, the first instance trial sentenced him to death for 2 charges, murder and robbery. However, Michael Tran and his family had filed an appeal, hoping to reduce the sentence from death to life imprisonment. The defense lawyer argued, the defendant committed the crime in a state of mental disturbance without prior preparation and voluntarily confessed and surrendered. These, according to the lawyer, should be considered mitigating factors. But the prosecution quickly rebutted. The representative of the procuracy affirmed, Michael Tran's actions were extremely dangerous to society, hooligan-like, brutal, and caused public panic. His surrender only came after the nationwide warrant was issued. Therefore, it cannot be considered a special mitigating circumstance. When given the chance for final words, Michael Tran stood, his voice trembling. The defendant apologizes to the victim's family, to my parents, to society. I know I cannot be forgiven for the crime I caused. I only hope for a chance to live to atone somewhat.
But those words did not sway the court. After a short deliberation, the judges announced the appeal was rejected and the death penalty upheld. In law schools, this case became a discussion topic. Lecturers and students dissected not only its legal aspects, but also criminal psychology. Some argued that the death penalty was inevitable, as only such punishment could deter. Others questioned, does execution really solve the root causes of crime, or does it only end one individual's fate? According to the 1999 Penal Code, Article 93 stipulates, anyone who commits murder under one of the following circumstances, with hooligan nature, for despicable motives, to commit or conceal another crime, shall be sentenced to 12 to 20 years in prison, life imprisonment, or death. Michael Tran's acts met nearly all aggravating circumstances. Murder with hooligan nature, murder to conceal robbery, cruel method, dismembering the body. Meanwhile, the mitigating factors were few and weak. Cooperation after being wanted, family contributions, unrelated to the case. Therefore, legal experts agreed the death penalty was entirely appropriate. Not only in this case, but the verdict also reflected the firm stance of the law against brutal crimes. It also highlighted the thin line between a student full of promise and a perpetrator when greed and selfishness cloud reason. Episode 5, Judgment Day. After the appellate trial, the death sentence for Michael Tran officially took effect.
The young man who was once an educated student, once expected to be his family's pride, now stood at the final threshold of life, the execution of the death penalty. On July 22, 2014, at Detention Center No. 1 of the Hanoi Police, the highest sentence under Vietnamese law was carried out by lethal injection. According to accounts from prison wardens, Michael Tran's final days unfolded in a state both calm and filled with anxiety. By day, he read books, occasionally jotting down a few lines, rarely speaking with other inmates. By night, Michael Tran lay restless, sometimes sighing, sometimes leaning silently against the wall. One prison officer once told CAND newspaper, "Michael Tran did not scream or resist. He knew clearly what his end would be. It seemed that he gradually accepted his fate. But whenever we mentioned his family or parents, his eyes darkened, full of regret."
In his final days, Michael Tran wrote letters to his mother. The full content was never disclosed, but according to prison staff, Michael Tran repeatedly wrote the words, "I'm sorry." It was too late, but at least it reflected the torment of a murderer's soul before leaving this world. On the morning of July 22, the execution process was carried out according to regulations. Michael Tran was taken from solitary confinement to the execution chamber. According to one witness, just before his final moment, Michael Tran said, "I'm sorry. Father, mother, family, everyone. I know nothing can be fixed anymore." Those were the last words of the man behind one of the most shocking cases in Vietnam's judicial history. To understand the weight of the Michael Tran case, it must be analyzed from several perspectives. First, the brutality of the crime. In the relatively peaceful context of Vietnam in 2010, murder cases involving dismemberment were extremely rare. Michael Tran's actions were not just killing in a sudden outburst, but a calculated plan to murder, to dispose, to cut up the body, to erase traces. This is what horrified the public. Second, the crime occurred in the heart of Hanoi, in a crowded apartment complex. People had never imagined that within upscale residences could lurk such a cold-blooded crime. It raised concerns about personal safety and trust in surrounding relationships.
Third, the perpetrator was a young intellectual, once a student at a prestigious university, from a decent family. This caused deep shock. Why would an educated man with a bright future descend into such monstrous crime? The contrast between intellectual, murderer, turned the case into a heated topic. Fourth, the role of the media. In 2010, social networks were rapidly expanding in Vietnam. News of the case spread at lightning speed, from print media and television to online forums. Endless commentary, debates, and analyses turned the case into a social phenomenon. For that reason, many journalists, legal scholars, and criminologists affirmed the Michael Tran case is not just an ordinary death sentence, but a milestone in early 21st century Vietnamese criminal justice. In Case Files, ANTV, broadcast in 2015, investigators openly admitted when they first approached the crime scene, they could not believe that a university student could act with such savagery. The case shocked not only the police, but left society in fear and doubt. At the time, many parents told Phapla TPHCM newspaper, "I fear for my child. He too is a student, also in love. Hearing this story, I no longer trust love these days.
Students in Hanoi, Haiphong, and Quang Ninh passed along a saying, "Don't ever love like Michael Tran," a clear sign of the psychological impact this case created. For years after the Michael Tran case closed, criminologists, forensic psychologists, and sociologists continued to cite it as a prime example of the convergence of personal motive, cold calculation, and lack of emotional control. Associate Professor Dr. Nguyen Xuan Yem, former director of the People's Police Academy, once stated in a professional journal, "What is remarkable in this case lies not only in the cruelty of the act, but also in the fact that the perpetrator was a young intellectual, formally educated. It reflects an alarming issue. Knowledge does not necessarily equate with character." Sharing the same view, a criminal psychologist from the Institute of Forensic Science, Ministry of Public Security, analyzed, "Michael Tran did not commit the crime in a single impulsive moment. Afterward, he carried out a series of actions to erase traces, dispose of the body, and stage the situation. These were signs of criminal calculation, far different from common crimes of passion." From a criminological standpoint, the case raises many questions. Why did a young, educated man with a promising future fall into crime? How could love, when tainted by jealousy and selfishness, become a motive for murder? More importantly, what can society, family, and schools do to detect and prevent seeds of violence hidden beneath a scholarly exterior? A sociologist from Vietnam National University told Thanh Ninh newspaper in 2015, "We often look at academic achievement, at the label of a good student, and feel assured that our children are fine. But character cannot be measured by grades or degrees. The Michael Tran case is a wake-up call for holistic education." In newspaper coverage, especially Com An Nhan Dan and Phap Luat Vietnam, journalists emphasized that this was not simply a tragic love story, but a mirror reflecting the fragility of morality under competition, pressure, and selfishness. Psychologists warned, when relationships break down, respect and letting go are essential. Possessiveness and controlling a lover, combined with pathological jealousy, can become the seed of crime. Youth must be taught emotional control and conflict resolution, not just academic achievement. A prison officer from the facility where Michael Tran was held before execution once shared with Ngoy Lao Dang newspaper. In his last days, Michael Tran showed some remorse, but the pain he caused the victim's family, his own family, and society can never be undone. Therefore, this case did not stop at a death sentence for one individual, but became a lesson for an entire generation. It forced society to confront a truth. Knowledge without character, love without respect, can carry terrifying risks. On July 22, 2014, after the execution, Vietnamese media simultaneously reported the news. Major newspapers such as Cand, Tui Che, and Tan Nien all ran editorials. Headlines often summed it up in one message: a case has closed, but the questions remain. For public opinion, the Michael Tran case will be remembered for years like an unofficial precedent case, reminding everyone that the law is strict, never tolerating crime, but more importantly, each person must cultivate character, control emotions, and respect the lives of others. Looking back at this entire series, we see
The case has ended, leaving behind the echo of trust in justice, that evil, no matter how cunning, will be exposed. The echo of legal deterrence, that no one escapes harsh punishment when committing crime. And above all, the echo of the human question: where lies the thin line between an outstanding student and a cold-blooded murderer? This series closes with a reminder: let us together safeguard a safe Vietnam.
Thank you for spending your time with us on Vietnam True Crime. If you're interested in this series, please like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest episodes.